Please prepare a cup of coffee and get ready to discuss the global geopolitical chessboard. Pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, Moscow, sympathizer, etc. These are certainly phrases commonly used in the context of the Ukraine war. And these terms are deeply emotional in nature. Most people are driven by emotions, leading to biased judgments. These emotions may arise from a lack of basic understanding of geopolitics or from associative thinking. For example, those who strongly support Russia often refer to the double standards of the West and what the US and its allies have done over the years, pushing Russia to the edge. Those who fervently support Ukraine often draw parallels with Vietnam and China, condemning Russia's actions and suggesting that if Russia can do this, China might do the same to Vietnam, making the US's actions more justified. Then came the war in Israel, and the division of sides became strangely blatant. Those who support Ukraine naturally support Israel, believing that Israel's actions are justified by Palestinian aggression. Conversely, those who support Russia tend to sympathize with Palestinians, viewing Israel as worse than Nazis. All of this stems from emotion, and expressing these emotions is deliberate, because anyone who is easily angered, fearful, or horrified lacks the ability for logical thought, and the more rational thought is drowned out by emotion, the more likely one is to be controlled by those emotions. Emotion is precisely the tool that politics uses to control the masses. However, geopolitics has no room for irrational emotionality. To understand geopolitics, one must analyze with complete coldness and detachment. Geopolitics is like a game of chess, and we all know that no one has ever won a chess match through emotions. Those who analyze best and remain cold-blooded always win. This also applies to observers of the game. Those who can understand the board and the strategy of the players only if they observe the match coldly and realistically, just like the players themselves. So, in this video, set your emotions aside to look at political issues from their true perspective, a political, emotionless one. From this viewpoint, we realize that anyone, Russia, the US, or others, who acts in a way that benefits their nation is right, and those who act against national interests are wrong. In geopolitics, observers or analysts. I, myself, am only at the basic level of emotional control. You must view political events as moves in a chess game. In chess, if you feel sorry for a pawn that has been sacrificed, you do not understand the game that a pawn is just a piece sacrificed for advantage, perhaps in exchange for a bishop. In geopolitics, nations and peoples are pawns, and a strategist doesn't care whether a country is destroyed or if hundreds of thousands of people die in the process. What matters to a strategist is that their side gains the upper hand while the other is weakened. A country devastated and hundreds of thousands dead, those are just pawns sacrificed. Strategists feel no compassion for them, just like chess players don't for wooden pawns exchanged for enemy bishops. This may sound cynical, but it is the reality of geopolitics. In a way, we're lucky to merely be observers, not strategists making decisions that could cost hundreds of thousands of lives if necessary. On the geopolitical chessboard, decision-makers view the world as a board and nations and their citizens as pieces. The powerful nations, especially the US, Russia, and China, are the players, while others are pieces in their hands. So we must imagine it in this simplified way to understand the relationships in the global geopolitical environment. Different regions have varying levels of importance and power. Some are pawns, others are rooks, cannons, or knights. Some are sacrificed like pawns, others protected like queens or kings, or promoted from pawn to queen. In America's case, for example, the UK and France are rooks or knights. Germany is the queen. Poland is being promoted from a pawn to a new queen. Ukraine is a pawn sacrificed. It all depends on the strategy and decisions of the players. They're all just pieces on the geopolitical board. Now we understand that geopolitics is devoid of emotion. The question arises. Does friendship between nations really exist? The answer is no. There are no friendships in geopolitics. Even when politicians tell us that the US and France are friends of Germany, or that China is a friend of Russia. Geopolitics speaks in terms of tangible interests. Russia and China are close today because they share common interests across various sectors. They both care about stability in Asia, as no country wants unrest near its borders. Russia values China's technology and industrial might. China needs Russia's raw materials and also benefit from its investments in certain technologies. Moreover, both Russia and China have been pushed into partnership by the US, which officially labeled them adversaries and has been working against them for years through sanctions and other measures. The US aims to maintain its position as the #1 global power, which requires preserving its global dominance. This is known as a unipolar world, where the US is the sole dominant power. Therefore, Russia and China share an interest in breaking that unipolar dominance, which has declared them enemies and now plays chess against them. They strive for a new world order without a single dominating power imposing its rules on others. They aim for a multipolar world where several powers, on equal footing, discuss their interests and seek solutions without one side dominating the rest. When countries align, it's not due to friendship, but mutual interests. Historically, the US is now on the defensive. After peaking in the 1990s and 2000s, the Soviet Union had collapsed, Russia was weak, China was underdeveloped. The US could do whatever it wanted globally, and it did. At that time, it was the undisputed world hegemon. Historians described it as the world's only superpower, but by 2000, Russia had stabilized under Putin, and China was rising quickly. By 2010, China was confident as a global power, while Russia was still cautious, unsure of its own strength. But Russia's response to the 2014 Maidan event marked its confrontation with American ambitions on its doorstep. In geopolitical chess, the United States arranged the board and placed pieces for its games with Russia and China. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Ukraine emerged as the most promising country in Eastern Europe. Despite having a weak industrial base, it was still operational and competitive, manufacturing airplanes, ships, space, and nuclear technology, and heavy industry. Ukraine is rich in natural resources such as coal and possesses some of the most fertile lands in Europe, arguably in the world. However, in the West, there was no desire for any new competition in these industries. Greedy Ukrainian elites welcomed the West as daily providers of sustenance in exchange for privatization policies pushed by the West, leading to the destruction of Ukraine's advantageous industrial sectors. Ukraine never fully utilized its potential and remained a poor country in Europe. In a chessboard analogy, Ukraine appears as a pawn on the European board. However, due to close family ties from the Soviet era and strong economic connections with Russia, Ukraine was a very significant piece. Alongside Russia, Ukraine could have become a queen, and Russia could have advanced much faster in development. With Ukraine, Russia could have obtained the strategic position of having a queen. Preventing this was one of the primary goals of American geopolitical strategists during the 1990s. Influential strategist Zbigniew Brzezinski detailed this in his 1997 work, The Grand Chessboard: American Primacy and Its Geostrategic Imperatives. In this and another foundational book, one can read about the developments of the following 2 decades. The U.S. aggressively built anti-Russian forces in Ukraine to drive a wedge between the two nations. As a result, Ukraine, a potential queen for Russia, remained a weak pawn as Russia grew stronger. The risk, from the U.S. perspective, that Ukraine might pivot back to Russia increased, as Russia became a more attractive partner to its neighbors. If cooperation with Russia offered Ukraine greater prosperity, Ukraine could have exited the U.S. sphere of influence. From the U.S. standpoint, this had to be prevented. Russia's interests differed. Russia had no intent to turn Ukraine into a satellite state. It envisioned Ukraine as a bridge between Europe, NATO's eastern expansion, and increasingly confrontational EU policies. From Russia's perspective, Ukraine should have first and foremost served as a buffer zone between Russia and NATO, and second, as a bridge for economic, trade, and cultural exchanges with Europe. Take note, Russia's foreign policy is not aggressive. It seeks mutually beneficial relations. It's not because Russia is inherently gentle or incapable of being ruthless. but because this is the most beneficial path for Russia. President Putin outlined Russia's key geopolitical objective in a 2001 speech: to create a vast, central zone stretching from Lisbon to Vladivostok, where European industry and technology combine with Russia's natural resources and human capital to form a central power. In this model, the EU and Russia would be mutually dependent, with neither able to dominate the other. Ukraine was the final key to this vision. And clearly, such a scenario would lead to greater prosperity for both Europe and Russia via Ukraine, and pose a threat to the United States. Thus, America's top priority in Europe became permanently and decisively separating Ukraine from Russia. The Maidan revolution, orchestrated and funded by the US, brought anti-Russian and even neo-Nazi-aligned governments to power in Kyiv, representing a significant American victory. But the US had learned from past failures, such as the Orange Revolution of 2004, which was not final, as a pro-Russian president was later elected. Maidan resolved this error. To prevent a repeat of undesired electoral outcomes, the US needed something that would ensure a permanent split between Russia and Ukraine, something irreversible. What better than war? The 2024 book on the Ukraine crisis reveals that the CIA director personally ordered Kyiv's then leaders to initiate war in Donbass. He secretly attended a key meeting of Ukraine's National Security Council in Kyiv. The White House admitted this just a few days later. The war in Donbass marked a real victory for the US. It enabled Washington to rally Ukrainian citizens against Russia and, more importantly, ensure that Crimea, populated by Russians, and Donbass, home to Russian-speaking citizens, could no longer vote. This guaranteed that only anti-Russian forces could win elections in Ukraine. In effect, Ukrainian farmers were now firmly under American control. The US resumed its broader objective: to defeat both adversaries on the Eurasian landmass through a war of resources and strength. Maidan was a small but vital step. However, Russia kept growing stronger, and all the sanctions imposed since 2014 failed to break its power. While Western experts predicted Russia's collapse and bankruptcy in 2014, the Russian economy grew, foreign reserves doubled, and the people continued to prosper. Hence, the most effective way to weaken a political opponent was to drag them into a costly proxy war. This principle is not new. A proxy war drains the opponent's resources, causes casualties, and could lead to domestic unrest, which in turn can be used for propaganda to incite other nations against the adversary, undermining their foreign policy. The RAND Corporation, in a previous video analysis I mentioned, outlined many US strategies. Among them was one that included provoking Russia by deploying nuclear weapons near its borders. RAND's research on Ukraine made it clear. The US was not interested in peace in Donbass. It wanted to exploit the war to provoke and punish Russia. President Zelensky openly threatened nuclear deployment at the Munich Security Conference in February 2022. Such declarations are not drunken fantasies. Anyone making them publicly has already committed to such actions, and Zelensky wouldn't have made this statement without US backing. This aligns precisely with RAND's envisioned outcome. Russia faced a dilemma akin to choosing between the plague and cholera. Either it allowed nuclear weapons on its border under the control of a government ruled by anti-Russian extremists, or it acted militarily at the last moment to prevent it. Russia chose the second option, which incidentally benefited the USUC. The US set up the Geopolitical board with Russia to force an absolute divide between Russia and Ukraine. It created indirect mechanisms to ensure Ukraine would be drawn westward, established a Western-serving regime in Kyiv, and guaranteed that pro-Russian regions would never rejoin the Ukrainian political process, ensuring only anti-Russian governments would be elected to completely restrain Russia. The US gave it two choices: either stay idle and allow Ukraine to acquire a nuclear arsenal run by an anti-Russian government, or act militarily to prevent that outcome. Both scenarios led directly to the war. Even now, this war is just another move in Russia's geopolitical game. The ongoing proxy war in Ukraine is a major burden on Russia. The US is exploiting it fully to weaken Russia economically and politically, and to build a coalition against it. Ultimately, Washington hopes to bring Russia to its knees through this war. They say it openly in Washington. The goal is to destroy Russia's economy. Here, let's note again, many say emotionally that Russia is going easy on Ukraine, avoiding civilian casualties because Ukrainians are brothers. But from a geopolitical view, this restraint is a tactical decision that benefits Russia politically and aligns with its military strategy, not necessarily compassion for the Ukrainian people. If a scorched earth strategy served Russia's national interest better, it would likely pursue it. As we've said since the beginning of this video, geopolitics is emotionless, ruthless, and full of calculated maneuvers. Emotions themselves are just another pawn in this game. Both the US and Russia use strategies that keep emotions boiling. It may sound paradoxical, but by being cold and detached, geopolitics manipulates emotion to control individuals and the masses by evoking outrage and horror through terrifying images, pushing people to act against so-called evil enemies, even if it hurts themselves. This is evident in the West's anti-Russia campaigns, even though such campaigns damage their own societies. Or when Putin used the loss at Kharkiv to ignite public outrage, leading citizens to support more aggressive actions, including the annexation of 4 eastern provinces and the deployment of regular forces, all with little domestic resistance. Crowds are often foolish and easily controlled. Just like Roman senators once told citizens that their sons had died nobly in battle, prompting the people to offer their own children to the gods in sacrifice. But these sacrifices were meaningless. Archaeologists later discovered that Roman senators' tales were just war propaganda. Today's slogans about human rights, saving the West, are similar. The only thing that matters is manipulating the foolish masses into accepting pain and death like soldiers. If the political goal is national interest, that emotional sacrifice is meaningful if pursued by leaders acting in the national interest. But if orchestrated by geopolitical elites serving only the powerful, it's utterly meaningless. As we recall the start of this video, the core problem today is that people are far too emotional, too reactive to think critically. That's exactly why they're so easily controlled. And that is the primary goal of the media, to keep emotions high so the public loses its will. Thank you for watching this video. Special thanks to all of you who support me. See you in the next topic.